Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Albright over here.
Ah.
We're moving around on you. I have some questions on the lease back of the farm show. So I just, to recap what we have heard from secretaries, we know that this is a first of its kind contract for the state, according to the DGS secretary, that this states that it's a farm show lease, but yet the Secretary of Agriculture said they're not involved in this, and the farm show commission was not involved in the approval, as well as DGS and the statute that states through DGS that it has to go through the board of commissioners in the public grounds and buildings to approve any lease, but he said this one didn't apply to that. So he is getting me a list of which ones don't apply to that particular statute. As well as the ability that we know this money wasn't borrowed for a capital debt or emergency or something that's constitutional to take the debt out for $375 million. So I just wanted to get your perspective as to exactly what, under what entity or what directive or what jurisdiction or what legal authority the governor had to go into this contract on behalf of the Commonwealth.
Okay, so let me say this first to set the record straight or to be clear about what the administration's preferred alternatives were or were not to balance the current year budget.
No, absolutely, and I totally understand because I've heard your point of view as to what we could have done, but what I'm trying to ask is exactly what is the legal authority for you to enter into this contract. And I'm jumping in primarily because I have a bunch of other questions with it, so I do know why you think you should have done it. I'm just asking what authority did you have to do it?
Okay, so to continue, we would have much preferred a severance tax.
And the authority that you are going to use for this?
That was our clear preference, but that was not the choice of the General Assembly. So in the end, we were given clear authority in the fiscal code to identify $300 million in transfers from funds or accounts, and in many cases to transfer from funds that otherwise, special fund accounts that otherwise had clear language that said that you couldn't use transfers from those funds for general fund budget balancing purposes. But the fiscal code gave us the clear authority to make those transfers, and using that authority, and then the statutory authority that DGS themselves has to enter into contracts to actually execute this transaction.
Okay, but this is, so the loan that was taken out, you're saying that the loan that was taken out is to comply with the special fund intent of what the legislature put forward? Because you are correct. We talked about special funds, talked about how much money is in the budget that's not being used, that we want to use existing money in existing accounts. And instead, you're saying that the governor decided to go out and take a loan out for $200 million and establish a new account in which to use for that transfer to comply with that part of the budget that was in the fiscal code?
This was one of the steps that we took in lieu of a severance tax to put the current year budget in balance.
Okay. Well, the fiscal code doesn't mention severance because that was not passed by the legislature. It mentions special funds. So the governor went and developed, and as of January, established a new special fund, and then took a loan out to fill that special fund, and then decided to transfer that money into the general fund to comply with what had been written in the fiscal code in October. Am I understanding that correctly?
This was one of the steps that we took to comply using the authority given to us in the fiscal code to balance the current year budget.
Okay,
I have to correct something that you also said in your opening statement.
Okay.
This is not the first time we've used
Okay, well, that was what the DGS secretary said, so please, what is it?
In fairness to him, I'll look at Representative Markosik, who I know was here at the time. But the first time we actually used this transaction mechanism was to build 4 prisons expeditiously at I think in 1990. My memory may be off by a year or so, but you know, when we first initiated, or when our corrections population was frankly out of control. And
so is that for a public safety entity? Because that is one of the constitutional allowances to do this.
We had to you know, build or construct 4 new prisons as expeditiously as possible, and this was the mechanism we used. More recently, I think around 2010, we used it to do improvements down the street for Harristown 2 at the Strawberry Square, or what you think of as Strawberry Square. building improvements. Also, we used the same financing mechanism.
So were those contracts, did those contracts go through, were they considered a lease back? Were they considered anything that would go through DGS and the commission that we talked about in DGS that approves all leases or anything like that?
You're referencing a different, I think you're referencing the Farm Show Commission.
No. The one that's under the board in DGS, it's, let me get the exact name of it because I always mess it up a little bit. The Board of Commissioners of Public Grounds and Buildings that's required to approve all leases for executive offices.
Yeah, I think in this case, it was a contract, and it was done under their existing executive authority given to them under the administrative code to operate.
Well, they were not involved in this contract. They were excluded from this contract. They were not a part of this lease
No,
back.
this contract was executed, by DGS.
But not through this commission, that's what I'm...
No, the commission didn't have a required responsibility as part of the transaction.
Okay, so the statute only applies to certain contracts.
I think I've been clear about the statutory authority that DGS has to enter into
Okay,
contracts.
so we just disagree as to what has to go through that, but for that statute, what has to comply with it. The Secretary is giving me a list. He said that which type of contracts have to go through and which ones don't. We're waiting for that list, so it'll be very interesting to see how many other types of things do not have to comply with statute. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Very good.